it's Wendy again, and this is the psychodynamic perspective, part 3, focusing on the thematic perception test, TAT. This is one of the important techniques used in psychodynamic analysis. And so we will cover the psychodynamic personality assessment, projective tests, and then introduction to TAT. And what is projective test? It's a test consisting of a series of pictures in which the examinees or the client is requested to create a story about the picture. And it is a method of revealing to the trained interpreter, for example, the psychologist, some of the dominant drives, emotions, sentiments, complexities, and also conflict of personality. And for example, the pictures are not very clear you can interpret from different perspectives. So this is the interpretation or the stories presented by the clients indicated the underlying factors of personality. So the defining feature of the projective test is that the test items are ambiguous. For example, the photo on the right-hand side, a boy sitting at the door, and people may notice different stories. For example, previous students, they mentioned that it's in a farm, it's in a remote community. The boy was there waiting for their parents coming home and from farming. And some interpret is that the boy is waiting for their friends after the school. So you can see everyone have different stories from the picture. And the person being assessed, the client, for example, is asked to respond to each of the series of ambiguous testing items. In order to respond to the items, the person must interpret it. That is, he or she, the client, must figure out what the test item looks like and means for him or her. For example, this photo, what does it mean for him or her? And the fundamental logic behind the projective test is that the person's interpretation will be revealing some of his personality or her personality. And it is thought that, in other words, that the individual will project the aspect of his or her own personality onto the test picture when interpreting it. Hence, it is named projective test. For example, the photo at the top is the little boy sitting at the door, and also with the sun, half of the sun shines through the door. And for me, when I look at this photo, actually it brought me back to my childhood. And I was 3 or 4 at that moment. And my mother moved to a countryside, the village she was born in. And I was, let me see, I was put in a kindergarten, but I just hated. I was told I was crying from the morning to the afternoon, so the kindergarten asked my mom, hey, take her home. We don't want this little girl who's crying all the time. And then my mother sent me back to the village with my auntie. So I was waiting, and my mother visited me during the weekend. So every Friday, I was sitting at the doorstep waiting for my mom coming home. So this is my story because it happened in my childhood, and it reflects some of my personality. For example, how I interpret this photo maybe reflect to my childhood experience, and the experience have some impact on my personality as well. And let's look at the history of TAT. It was conceptualized by Henry Murray and Christina Morgan in 1935, but more fully elaborated in 1938 and 1943. It was believed that the material derived from the test could serve as an X-ray of personality. It reflects our personality and also what happened in the past. And what happened in the past will always have some impact on our personality. And no clear agreement on scoring or interpretation system, which means it largely depends on the experience of the one who interprets the story of the client. And varying methods of administration regarding number, sequence, and type of cards that are given. It is ranked as the sixth most frequently used test by clinical psychologists. So which means that there are a number of cards. We will talk about that later. There are 20 cards. And which number you present first as a clinician, and in what sequence, and what type of cards are given to the clients all have impacts on the personality assessment as well. So this is the brief history of the TAT. And let's look at Murray's theory of personality. And he looked at how do individuals react with their environment. This is very different from Freud's perspective. Freud's focus on the person, abnormality of the person. But from now on, Murray actually look at the interaction with environment as well. How are they affected by their external forces? How are individuals affected by the external forces, by the environment? How do the person's attitudes, needs, and values influence their reaction to the world? And also Murray developed a list of 28 needs that were later reduced to 7 needs. So he used the list of needs to evaluate the stories created by the client. And also he developed a list of 24 possible forces in person's environment named as press. He gave the concept of thema, which is a pattern of related needs and press derived from early infantile experiences. The concept of needs, press, and thema are the building blocks of Murray's theory. And as we can see, Murray departs from psychoanalysis, use the term personology, namely examining the entire person rather than the piece by piece. If you remember, in the dream analysis, Freud used piece by piece of the information to evaluate, provide assessment of the client. And so he used the term for the entire person to describe his study of human lives and individual differences in personality. And he described a habit system as automatic unconscious behavior shaped by the ego, and superego. So now we can see the connection between Murray's projective test and Freud's theory, still using the ego, and superego. Murray emphasized a positive instinct related to motivation and needs rather than negative instinct, rather than everything is driven by sexuality or sex force. So this is the difference between Murray and Freud's theory. So what does it mean by need? A need refers to a potential a potentiality or readiness to respond in a certain way under certain given circumstances. And needs organized perception, guiding us to see and what we want, that's need. What we want is the need. So actually what we want organize our perception of the world, and also guiding us to see what we need. For example, this is the example. For example, if we haven't eaten today, then the deficit is for food, deficit in food. So the need is we need food. And because we haven't eaten today, so we feel hungry. And the motive is hunger, lack of food, the need of food, and the motive is hunger. So we can have different way to deal with it. One is there are thoughts and fantasies thinking about food and fantasizing about a big meal, perceiving that a rock looks like a loaf of bread or a fish. So this is one way to satisfy the need. Another way is behaviors intended to satisfy the need. For example, go to a store, buy food, bring it home, cook it, or eat it. So these are the different level of satisfied need from a race perspective. Murray defined needs in two ways, primary and secondary. Primary needs are the biological needs such as food, water, oxygen, air. And secondary needs is more about the psychological needs such as nurturing, achievement, and independence and love. And he identified a total of 17 needs, each belong to one of the 5 popular needs categories. The 5 categories are ambition, materialism, power, affection, and information. For example, for ambition needs, including achievement, to accomplish difficult tasks, overcoming barriers and achieving expertise, and also exhibition to impress others. And we want to exhibit our needs, our competence to impress others through one's action and words, even if what is said or done is shocking. And we need recognition as well to show achievements to others and gain recognitions for these achievements. So this is the ambition needs. Another needs is materialistic needs, for example, acquisition to acquire things, food, for example, buying foods, and retention to keep the food that have been acquired in order to keep the things clean, neat, and tidy. For example, we have a shelter, then we need to keep the home, the shelter, clean, neat, and tidy. And construction, make or build things. For example, build a garden and grow plants. That's the materialistic needs. And also, for example, power needs have the different needs such as aggression, autonomy, and brain avoidance, contrariance, defense, dominance, harm avoidance, and lots of different needs for the powers, for the power needs. And affection needs, for example, we need affiliation. We need to be close and loyal to other persons, pleasing them and winning their friendship and attention, or nurturing to help the helpless, feeding them and keeping them from danger. And for example, looking after our pets, play, rejection, sex, and also being loved, nursed, helped, forgiven, and these are the affection needs. There is another needs, information needs. And for example, seek knowledge and ask questions about things in order to understand, to provide information, to educate others. These are the information needs. So from the 17 needs, Murray categorized three big motifs. One is achievement. We want to achieve. One is power. We want power. Another is intimacy. We want to be loved. We want to love others. So these are the motive. When we analyze the cars, the TAT cars, we can use the 17 needs we presented previously and also the three motives. What kind of needs you identify and what kind of motives you identify as well when you look at the your own story of the TAT or the stories of TAT from others, from your clients, for example, in the future. So general conditions for using TAT to be administered in an interpersonal setting. And also consistent 20 cards, I mentioned that before, on which ambiguous pictures are presented. And the examiner, for example, the psychologist, will show some pictures one at a time and one card at a time with the following instruction. Make up a story around the picture. Like all good stories, it should have a beginning, a middle, and an ending. Tell me how people feel and what they are thinking. And so if you present 10 cards, 10 pictures, it's about 15 minutes to complete, which means 5 minutes and approximately 5 minutes for each card. And for the story structure, for example, current situation, what is happening at this moment through the when you look at the picture, and thoughts and feelings of the characters of the people in the story, what the characters are feeling and thinking, preceding events, what has led up to event show in the pictures, what kind of events happening and what lead to this event and outcome as well. So these are the structure we give to the participants after we give the instruction presented in the previous slides. If the client or participants have difficulty to develop a story, then we can give the further instruction like this. What happened at this moment? What are the characters feeling and thinking? What has led up to the event to show in the picture and in your story? What are the outcomes to give the guidance for the client or the participant to structure the story? And procedures time measure should begin when the picture is first presented and end when the subject begins his and stories. And also a subject's complete responses should be recorded along with a noteworthy behavioral observation, for example, the body language and the facial expression and the engagement with the picture, change in the voices. So these are the procedures. Measure the time, begin with the picture is presented, and also end when the person begin to his or her stories. And the timing is important because between the picture is presented and the person starts the story, which means whether the person's engaged with the picture with the text or disengaged, and then give some time. If the time is too long, then you started to give more instruction to the person so that the person can develop the story. And what about the person could not develop a story? That would be the case even after we give more instruction. Then your observation is important. For example, and what's happening to the person, the body language, the facial expression, and whether there is some eye contact with you, and also eye contact with the picture, so that you can have some record of the process, even though the person may not give you any stories. And questioning and inquiry, these are part of the procedure as well, to produce an unhampered and free flow of the subject's fantasy materials. So using the questioning and inquiry to help the participants to develop, or the client to develop a free flow material. Order of presentations. Usually the cards should be administered according to their sequential numbering system. For every card, there is a number of the card. So often we just follow, even though, for example, we have 20 cards, but you only choose 10 cards, but you still follow the order of the numbering. And how do we score or evaluate the story? We look at the hero. The hero means the central characters. The hero doesn't need to be a good person, maybe a bad person, as long as it's the central characters, is the hero. And also look at the needs of the hero, the needs of this person, and the press. What does it mean by press? Refers to any important environmental factors that may influence or interfere with the needs of the hero. For example, parents or boss, or the lock on the door is broken. This is what we call press. Parents and or boss, that's not the hero itself. That's the parents of the hero or the boss of the hero. So they are environmental factors. They are the external factors. This is what we call presses. In the interpretation of the responses of the TAT, the psychologists or the researchers or examiners typically focus their attention on one of the three areas: the content of the stories, and also the feeling or the tone of the stories, and the subject's behavior apart from responses. For example, the tone of the story is a positive or negative, and also the behavior, the subject's behavior, the hero's behavior. For example, verbal remarks, such as comments about feeling stressed by situation or not being good stories tellings, or nonverbal actions or signs. For example, difficulties of making eye contact with you or with the psychologist. So these are the important signals that the client or the subject sent to us. The three levels of interpretation suggested by Ballard and Brand are: description level. This is the mere repeat of the story. Interpretative level, it extends to the descriptive level by an alteration of it. For example, if one does the X, then the outcome will be the Y. So they are different, not just describe what happened in the story. So as a psychologist, when we interpret the TAT stories, we should not just merely repeat the story. We need to interpret. And also diagnostic levels, this is the further extension that interference is made about the client. So for example, have the diagnosis of the personality, whether the client have a personality disorder, have a mental health issues. These are three different levels. So examples, picture one, the description level. the boy is practicing to increasing his competence in violins. Interpretative level, if the boy practiced, then he or she will improve. And also diagnostic level, the clients have a high need for achievements with the high level of self-efficacy. So these are the different levels we can use when we look at the photo or when we evaluate our clients' TAT stories. So the results of the TAT must be interpreted in the context of the subject's personal history, age, sex, level of education, occupation, racial or ethnic identification, first language, and other characteristics that may be important. So which means that when we interpret the TAT stories, we need to consider the personal characteristic of your client or uh, of the participant so that we can have a good interpretation of their TAT stories. And the results of TAT are difficult to generalize because it largely depends on the experience of the psychologist or of the researcher so that they can interpret through the three levels, across the three levels. The results are often subjective and do not use any formal type of scoring system when Murray developed TAT. However, a close analysis of the story told by the subject or the client normally gives the examiner a decent idea of the traits mentioned above, for example, personality, emotional control, emotional regulation, and attitudes towards the aspects of everyday life, self-efficacy, self-esteem as well. So actually close analysis is important. When we interpret the story, read the story several times so that you can fully understand what's in the stories so that you can use the three levels to interpret the stories of your clients. So these are the examples of the cars. I only present the 6 cars, and all the cars are uploaded to LearnJCU in the tutorial folder. So you will have 20 cars for your own personality TAT test or for the client you would like for your future clients if you would like to use the TAT cards as well. And maybe for your for example, your research participants, when you move to the Master of Psychology level. And this is the boy I mentioned previously. A boy is sitting in the doorway of a log cabin. It's just an example for the card. And strengths of TAT offering access to the covert and deeper structure of individuals' personality. And also compare to Freud's dream analysis is less suspicious to faking because of the purpose of projective techniques is usually disguised. And also intrinsically interesting and non-threatening. So often the clients or participants are willing to do the TAT test because it's quite interesting, have different pictures and develop a story based on the pictures. Limitations, and we already mentioned some limitations, for example, difficulties of establishing adequate internal consistency and text reliability. It largely depends on the interpreter. And the effectiveness of the technique is often more dependent on the clinician's individual skills than the quality. And is sensitive to situational variables such as the mood and the stress, sleep deprivation, and the differences in instruction. So it depends on the mood of the clients and even the mood of the psychologist when the psychologist analyzes the TAT stories. And also it largely depends the different instruction and different order of the cards presented to the participants. So these are the limitations of TAT test. And so thank you so much for listening to these lectures. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is wendy.li@edu.jcu at jcu.edu.au. Thank you so much. See you next time.